So for this card, I started by working on the background and using a piece of 5 by 7 inch paper. I blended some cracked pistachio distress oxide along the bottom. And I left a bit of a gap for the sand at the bottom of the scene. And then I used my broken china distress oxide and blended this in towards the middle of the background. And usually when I'm blending together a background, I go from darkest to lightest or lightest to darkest. But I thought I would try something slightly different on this one. And instead of getting darker at the top, I went a little bit lighter. So I blended some speckled egg distress oxide along the top there. And it looks quite effective once it's all blended together, as you'll see shortly. So that once that was blended in, I went back and made sure that all the colors are evenly spread along the background. I blended in that cracked pistachio, and then I added more of that speckled egg along between the cracked pistachio and the broken china. And then because I wanted my sand to be low down at the bottom of my background, I decided that I needed a tiny bit more of that cracked pistachio. So there's about 1 inch at the bottom where I will have sand. And then once I was happy with my background and it's all blended together, I just lightly spritzed the whole thing with water. And then I used my heat tool to dry it. And you get this beautiful background, which is perfect for a summer card. Just gorgeous. Now to add sand onto my background, I'm going to use some of the recycled paper. It's called craft paper. And I'm going to tear it to create a nice texture, and it helps it look a little bit more like sand. And then I'm going to use some double-sided tape and put this along the bottom of this, and then I can secure it to the bottom of my background. Now I want to have some items tucked behind this sand, so I'm not putting the double-sided tape right up to the top. There's a little bit of wiggle room there. And you can decide how deep you want your sand to be. Like I said, mine is about just under 1 inch deep. And then I'm just going to cut off the excess on the back of the card. Now, if you prefer, you could add this sand on later. As you'll see, it might be easier to do that, but this is the order that I did it in. So then I'm going to use the beach sunset stencils from Lawn Fawn to add some palm trees on the back of my scene. And I'm just using some low-tack tape to tape off the areas I'm not using so I don't get texture paste on them. And the texture paste that I'm using, it's from KITSCH. It's actually called Glitter Frosting Paste. This is a sand color. And it goes on sort of matte, as you'll see here, but as it dries, it gets very sparkly and it looks perfect on this background. If you don't have this kind, you could always use a clear sparkle paste and then just add some distress oxide or distress ink color in a brown shade to tint it. And then I'm going to remove that. It takes about 10 minutes to dry. And then I will apply some of the mint green color on the palm tree leaves. So I'll just use some of that tape again, just to cover up the areas so I don't accidentally put texture paste there. And I'll use that mint green color. This glitter paste, the sparkle paste, is so sparkly in real life, and it's a lot of fun to use. It's well worth using if you manage to get a hold of some. So I'm just going to clean off my stencils again once I've wiped off the excess here. And then I can give it about 10 minutes to dry before adding some more on the other side of the card. So I have this one palm tree that's kind of going off the edge of the card and the other one on the left-hand side. So I'll just use that same mint green color and some leaves on the other palm tree, and then repeat the same thing with the sand color on the other side. And if you're new to using sparkle paste or texture paste, one of the tricks that I find very helpful is to use a flat palette. So the one I'm using is quite flat. They also have a pointed one that's flat as well, but whichever one you prefer to use. And that helps you wipe off the excess because you only need a little bit of this paste. And if you put too much on, it will go under the stencil and make a bit of a mess. Also, just make sure that you wash your stencils right away, because if you leave the texture paste or glitter paste on, it will get stuck and you won't be able to clean it off your stencil. So once both of those palm trees are done, you can see how beautiful they are. Perfect for any card, but especially for this beach themed card. And once again, I'll leave this for about 10 minutes before I move on to adding anything else on this background. In the meantime, I'm going to start working on my beach huts. So I used 3 different colors of oxide inks for my beach huts. This one is KITSCH Flamingo, and then there's also one in Spice Marmalade and Squeeze Lemonade, which you'll see in a moment. So each one of these papers is 4 inches by 3.5 inches. It doesn't need to be any bigger, and I'm going to be die cutting some pieces from the Build a House set, as well as the Build a House Beach add-on set. Now, if you wanted to build the proper beach house, you will need a bigger piece of paper for each of them, but since I'm only using the top part of the house, because I'm making them into beach huts, I don't need the full size, as you'll see in a moment here. So here's the 3 pieces of paper with the 3 different Distress Oxide colors. And I'm going to use the Build a House Beach Door, the original roof piece, and then I've got the surfboard, the inside and the outside of the surfboard, and the little flag piece. And then I've got the original Build a House piece, but I'm not cutting the whole part as you see here, just about 1/2 inch underneath that window. And then I'm going to trim it with my scissors so that it goes straight down. And I'm only using enough of that to cover up the door. So the door covers that little hole, and then the bottom part of that beach hut I will cut off. So this orange one is actually a little bit long, and I'll trim it later on. But you can see once you put the pieces on, it looks like a really nice little beach hut. And these 3 colors, I'm just going to mix and match them so that they're all different combinations of the 3 colors. So I'm just going to glue all these pieces together, and then I'm going to use some glue, and I've just added some little anchors that I cut with some holographic sparkly paper. I'm going to put 1 anchor on each of these little beach huts. And I also used white paper to cut out the flags that you see at the top of those beach huts there. And although I've got 3 surfboards, in the end I only use 2 of these, but you could use all 3 if you prefer. So you'll notice how that orange hut is a little bit longer than the others, but I do end up trimming it later on. So now to add them onto my scene, I'm just going to lift up that sand at the bottom, because remember there was that little bit of wiggle room. And then after putting on some double-sided tape on the back of that beach hut, I can squeeze it underneath so it looks like the sand is in front. If you prefer, you could always add the sand on last, but it's quite easy to use your die pick and pick up that sand and squeeze it underneath. So I'm going to put the 3 beach huts in a row at the bottom here. And then I'm going to add in my sentiment and the surfboards. Now the sentiment I got from the On the Beach set. It says, "It's your birthday, seize the day." And on the inside of the set, I used the pool party set as well as the You Are Sublime set, but you'll see that in a moment. So once I'm happy with those beach huts, I'll start figuring out where I want my surfboards to go. And as I mentioned, I only ended up using one on the outside, and I use one on the inside later on in the video. So I think it looks best if you have the surfboard tucked underneath the sand as well, and it really helps to bring this to life. So once that's all sorted, I'm going to add my sentiment, and I'll use some foam squares to pop the sentiment up and put it on the card. And as I mentioned, this one is from the On the Beach set. But before I remove the sticky bits on those foam squares, I'm going to add one of the seagulls from that same beach sunset stencils. And I used some weathered wood distress oxide for this first, but as that ink dries, it tends to lighten a little bit as it dries. This seagull got a little bit lost. So later on in the video, you'll see I make this seagull stand out a bit more by adding some more ink on top. But first, I'm going to work on my card base. So this is my 5x7" card base, and I used the set You Are Sublime and one of the leftover surfboards, and I just stamped and colored the lobster from that set, and I'm just going to glue him onto this surfboard. And then in the pool party set, there's a cute little speech bubble, and it has a whole bunch of different sentiments. So I put happy birthday in there, or happy B-day, and I just have it coming out of the lobster's mouth there. It's perfect for a nice summer birthday card. So once that's had a few minutes to dry, I'm going to add my background onto this. And I used a combination of glue and double-sided tape just to make sure it was going to stay on the card. And then, as I mentioned, now that that distress oxide has lightened, you can't really see that seagull anymore. So I just used that same stencil and lined it up over that seagull, and I added some black soot distress ink over top. And because it's already got that weathered wood distress oxide, it kind of goes more of a gray rather than a black color, but it looks quite nice for that seagull, and it's just perfect for the front of this card. So now you can see the finished card here with that beautiful summer scene and the lobster on the inside.